Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today, after months and weeks of coverage and leading up to this moment, we finally have our last and final election prediction for the 2025 New Jersey governor's race. An election that has been very interesting and a very fascinating one to cover. So just to give you some very quick background of this race, the Democrat Mikie Sherrill and the Republican Jack Ciattarelli, how we got here. Well, New Jersey, in the way it's used to be known, was a lot more of a Democratic state. For instance, back in 2020, it went to Joe Biden by roughly 16 points in the 2020 presidential election. Now, at the governor level, the state's a little bit more complex, where you can go back to, say, let's start with 2009. The Republican Chris Christie wins the governor's race against the Democratic incumbent, who was scandal-plagued in a very close race. 2013, Chris Christie wins re-election by 22 points. Now, by the end of his term, Chris Christie's approval numbers are falling off, and looks like his party is essentially dead in the water. 2017, Democrat Phil Murphy wins by 14.1% against Christie's lieutenant governor, Kim Godano. Now, after that likely Democratic win, it also came in the year 2017. Now, that's very important because the way these governor's elections usually go is they're the first year after the presidential election, and usually the opposite party than the one that's in the presidency in the White House, usually that party does well. Meaning, if it's a Democratic president, usually the Republican candidate will win or do well. Or if it's a Democratic president, then the Republican candidate will do well. So in 2017, the Republican president Donald Trump, Trump's first term, the Democrats did very well in New Jersey, winning by 14.1%. And in Virginia, where the Democrat Northam won by 9%. Now comes 2021. Phil Murphy is facing off against his first and only re-election attempt, as you can only serve 2 terms in New Jersey, and he's facing off against a Republican who previously ran for governor but did not win the primary in 2017. He's facing off in 2021 against a Republican named Jack Ciattarelli. Now, Jack Ciattarelli and Phil Murphy in this race, it's taking place in 2021 when the Democrat President Joe Biden is in the White House. So naturally, Republicans are supposed to be in for a very good night. But the polling data didn't 100% reflect that. Phil Murphy was breaking 50% of the vote in the polling average, getting 50.5%, and Jack Ciattarelli was only getting 42.7%, with roughly 7% of voters still undecided. So this race, though it would be considered a likely Democratic win by the margins, didn't seem to be all that of a competitive race. And looking at the final few days of polling, the only one that showed it under 5 points was the Republican Trafalgar Group pollster, who usually, as a close pollster of President Trump, is going to show the Republicans at their absolute best. Now, what happens? Pretty much all of those undecided voters broke for Jack Ciattarelli. Phil Murphy, the Democrat, still won this race, 51.22% of the vote, but Jack Ciattarelli way outperformed expectations in this race, getting up to 48% of the vote, including making some very important gains in a lot of counties around New Jersey, which I'll be getting to in just one moment. Since 2021 and Jack Ciattarelli's very narrow defeat of Phil Murphy, there was a lot of rumors and speculation that Ciattarelli would try and run for governor again in 2025 when Phil Murphy would be term limited. Now, obviously, we know in hindsight, of course, that he did and won the Republican primary without much turmoil. But how much were the Republicans really optimistic about New Jersey? Well, I'm sure after that election in 2021, they were feeling pretty good that if Ciattarelli ran again, he could make it a close race. But you still may be wondering, well, New Jersey at the presidential level is still a pretty reliable blue state, though. It just voted for Joe Biden by 16 points. Yes, Chris Christie was the Republican governor, but can the Republicans really win? And then 2024 happens. New Jersey at the presidential level, the federal level, the level where, for some reason in the United States, people are willing to vote one way for national office like president and Senate, but not the state level for governor. They'll split on them. You'll see Republican governors in Massachusetts, but you'll never see a Republican senator in most instances. New Jersey, the longtime Democratic stronghold, voted for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump by only 5.9%. And a lot of the gains that Ciattarelli made in the governor map came pretty close to replicating in the presidential map, which set the stage for the 2025 New Jersey governor's race between Democrat Mikie Sherrill and Republican Jack Ciattarelli. Now, Mikie Sherrill, for her own right, ran a very tough Democratic primary against several candidates, and one where the polling showed that she consistently led, but with a lot of undecided voters, leaving her open to a potential, if one of the candidates caught fire, that they could beat her in the primary. Though she went on and won 34% in the primary and became the Democratic nominee after a tough fight, where Jack Ciattarelli, on his side of things, got the endorsement very early on of President Trump and essentially had the primary on lock, where he ended up winning 67.82% of the vote. Now comes the general election. All eyes are on New Jersey, especially as you look at the Virginia governor's race, where the polling shows that one is essentially out of reach, Winsome Sears not really catching on in the way for the Republicans as Jack Ciattarelli did. Mikie Sherrill, Jack Ciattarelli facing off. There are two third-party candidates running as well. Vic Kaplan, a libertarian, and Joanne Kunininski, a socialist workers perennial candidate as well. So this is not a two-person race. This is technically a four-person race as well. But Ciattarelli and Sherrill are the main two candidates facing off. And this race right now, though it is very close, the Democrats do have a narrow edge in this race. Cook Political Report, Inside Elections, and Sablo Crystal Ball have the race listed as lean for the Democrats. Whereas in the last few days, race to the White House has shifted their rankings to likely for the Democrat. And State Navigate has a likely for the Democrat as well. And now we come to what we're all looking for, the polling data, where in the final few days and few weeks, Mikie Sherrill is now leading over Jack Ciattarelli by right around that 5-point margin, which based on the rankings that I use, 1 point under is tilt, 1 to 5 points is lean, 5 to 15 is likely, and 15 or more is considered safe. Now, depending on which average you look at, Mikie Sherrill is either under 5 points or a little bit over 5 points. On Decision Desk, 50 plus 1, and Vote Hub, she is above 5 points. Now, for Race to the White House and Real Clear Politics, she is narrowly under 5 points. But it's been a consistent trend that Mikie Sherrill is leading over Jack Ciattarelli. The last time there was a poll that showed Jack Ciattarelli beating Mikie Sherrill, you'd have to go back to September, and a Republican pollster, which I believe was on an internal poll of the Jack Ciattarelli campaign, which showed him winning 46-45 with still 9% of voters undecided. Otherwise, Mikie Sherrill has led in every single poll, or it's been tied. Now, there have been some polls that have shown this race very close in the last few days. We just got a poll from Emerson College a few days ago, which showed a race that was 49-48 with still 2% undecided. And when you can put in voters who are leaning towards a given candidate, still showed Sherrill leading 50-48, 1% saying other and 1% undecided. Now, still, it's very clear that in the polling, Mikie Sherrill has a narrow lead over Jack Ciattarelli. In this race, though, we're seeing some similarities to 2021, but also a little bit of differences as well. One similarity is that Mikie Sherrill is right around that 50% mark and right around that 50% number. Not too dissimilar to what ultimately Phil Murphy ended up getting in this race, where Phil Murphy in the polling data was getting 50.5% by November 1st. Now, obviously, we're past November 1st as of the time you're seeing this video, but Mikie Sherrill's right around getting that 50% number. But it is leaving, if every single one of those voters turned out, leaving a very slight gap for Jack Ciattarelli in this race. Now, Ciattarelli, though, is polling at 44.52% of the vote. So the math alone will tell you, you don't need to break 50% of the vote in this race to win in New Jersey, given the fact that there's third-party candidates present. But if you're breaking 50% of the vote obviously in politics and elections, you're going to win. You're getting more than the other candidate can mathematically get. But Jack Ciattarelli is polling a few points back at 44.52. Now, when you compare that to 2021, even though Jack Ciattarelli is losing in the polls, he is running about 2 points better than he did in 2021. Though the issue is he's still trailing his Democratic opponent. Now, you can look for a few reasons here. Well, there's still roughly about 6 points, 5.94% of voters that are undecided. What if they all break for Jack Ciattarelli like they did in 2021? And I'm here to say that could absolutely happen and could lead to an incredibly close race like the Emerson poll suggests, where it ends up being around a 2-point margin. However, when you look at the other recent polling, Emerson so far is the only one showing that. A2 Insights shows a 4-point race. Coefficient, a Republican pollster, shows it tight, but YouGov shows it roughly a 10-point race. Quinnipiac shows it a 8-point race. The Fox News Beacon Research Shaw Company poll, they showed a 7-point race for Sherrill over Ciattarelli. And Suffolk University, with a lot of undecided voters left, show it a 4-point race. So how this is all shaping up in New Jersey is this is a very close competitive race without a doubt. Jack Ciattarelli is outperforming his 2021 polling numbers at 44.52%, but in 2021, Ciattarelli had the added advantage of running in an election environment that was going to be anti-democratic and more inclined for a Republican to do well. Whereas this time around, Jack Ciattarelli is running in an election environment that historically the Democrats have been the party that have gained from running in this election environment. Now, one interesting fact came from the Emerson poll, which showed that President Trump is actually more approved of in the state of New Jersey than the outgoing governor, Democrat Phil Murphy. That's why when you've seen the coverage of this race at the local level, Jack Ciattarelli has tried to make this race all about New Jersey. Mikie Sherrill's tried to make this race all about President Trump, because they know that Mikie Sherrill knows if the race is about Donald Trump, it's more likely than not Democrats will turn out to vote and Mikie Sherrill will win. If Jack Ciattarelli makes this race about the issues of New Jersey and about the job that Democrat Governor Phil Murphy is doing, he will have a stronger chance to win, as voters, even though they may not like the president, they also may not be too well approving of the job that Governor Phil Murphy is doing. So these two candidates are both using their best case strategies and their smart strategies to try and win this race. And what ultimately is leading it to is a very close competitive race that Mikie Sherrill at the moment is currently winning by roughly around 4.5% to 5%, with still 6% of voters either voting other or currently undecided. Now, first things first, let's get the third-party candidates out of the way. I think we're going to see a situation where the other candidates are going to amount to right around 1.5% to 2% total. I don't think they're going to exceed 2%, but I do think they're probably going to get at least 1.5% to 2% when everything is said and done. So with that said, that would take roughly about 2% away and leave 4% of voters undecided. And that's where I think things could get really interesting. Can Jack Ciattarelli win all of those 4% and make it a one-person race? Yes, he could. Could Mikie Sherrill win all of those 4% and make it essentially a 8-point race? Also, yes, she could. But ultimately what it comes down to is I think we're going to see somewhat of a mix in the middle, where both Mikie Sherrill and Jack Ciattarelli are doing pretty decently in the polling. Sherrill's doing a little bit underperforming what Democrats did in 2021, but we're seeing both of these candidates doing well in the polling overall, and I think those undecided voters essentially split a little bit in Jack Ciattarelli's direction, but not by a whole lot, where I think we see Mikie Sherrill get up to around 51% or so, where Jack Ciattarelli splits to about 46, 47% or so, and then leaving about 2% still undecided in that regard. Now, ultimately, though, when you look at the polling data, it's super close, but Mikie Sherrill is starting to do what she has not yet done in this campaign thus far on the Decision Desk HQ website, or polling average website, which is break 50% of the vote. If she could break 50%, she could probably win this race if all of her supporters turn out. And Jack Ciattarelli, who got up to 48% in 2021 in an election environment that was pro-Republican, now an election environment that's pro-Democrat, he's running a very close competitive race, but he's running in an election environment that Republicans should not be doing as well in. So the fact this is a close race at all is showing that Jack Ciattarelli is a very strong candidate for the Republicans to run in this matchup. But even still, if Mikie Sherrill is getting near 49.9%, near 50% of the vote, it may be just enough for her to win, even with Ciattarelli likely surging. So that's where the polling data shows. It also shows here on the confidence interval where the vote overlaps here when you account for the margin of error and such, and both candidates at their best and worst. And with Ciattarelli at his best and Mikie Sherrill at her worst, there is a decently sized opportunity that Jack Ciattarelli can win this race if ultimately everything breaks his way. But the question is going to be, how likely is it that that is going to happen? Now, if this race is all about the president, Jack Ciattarelli is probably not going to win. But if this race is all about Governor Phil Murphy, then Jack Ciattarelli has a very significant chance of winning. However, we do have to look at history here and notice, yes, 2021 was very close, yes, 2024 was much closer than expected. But in those races, the Democrat did win both times. So even though those races got very close, the Republicans have not broken that hurdle of actually winning the races yet. It's gone a lot closer, and New Jersey is trending more into being a toss-up state than being the safe Democratic stronghold that it once was. But at this current point in time, we've still not seen the Democrat lose at the presidential level, and since the Chris Christie term, we have not seen the Democrat lose at the governor level. And as for this race right now, Jack Ciattarelli is running a very competitive race. I think he's going to at least split the undecided voters that are left out there. But Mikie Sherrill being right around 50%, I think takes a little bit of that oxygen out of the room for Ciattarelli. And I think Jack Ciattarelli ultimately will fall a little bit short in this race, just due to the fact that Mikie Sherrill in the final weeks has done a good enough job at shoring up support. Because if we look at the end of September, Sherrill had 46.5, Ciattarelli had 42.3. And here, we actually saw a pretty big momentum shift in this race, where Sherrill was at 47.2, Ciattarelli 39.2. Ciattarelli went up about 3 points in this race to make it a 5-point race. Now, Sherrill, for her own part, did go up to about 48.8% right around the beginning of October, and Ciattarelli pretty much stayed relatively consistent for that time. The support sort of peaked around here, around October 17th, where Sherrill at 48.8, Ciattarelli 44.7. For Ciattarelli to really win this race, at least on the polling side of things at this time, he needed to really skyrocket in the polls and for Sherrill to either remain the same or start going down. Ultimately, what happened was Sherrill's support grew by about half a point to a point, and Ciattarelli went back down to 43.4. Now, the good news for Ciattarelli is at 44.8 and even at one point at 45, his support is now technically the highest it's been since that October number. The bad news for him, though, is that unless you count back in June, this is the highest Mikie Sherrill support has also been as well. And as she's breaking that 50% number, Jack Ciattarelli being at 45% or so, he's still running about 4 points behind where he needs to be to ultimately win this race. I have no doubt in my mind on election day, this is going to be a very close, competitive race, and we're waiting probably a few hours for all the votes to come in to see how this is ultimately going to shake down. But I think based on how things are going, Jack Ciattarelli is running a competitive race, but one like in 2021, he's probably going to become a few points short of actually winning this race when everything is accounted for. Now, I talked about the polling for this race right now. I just want to briefly look back at the 2021 and the 2024 New Jersey map, because you saw Phil Murphy and Jack Ciattarelli face off here, and Jack Ciattarelli did very well. 3.2 points won by Phil Murphy, but you saw some impressive wins. Hunterdon County was an 18-point win for Jack Ciattarelli. Morris County was an 11-point win for Jack Ciattarelli, a very big one. You also saw two very key important counties in Passaic County being a very narrow win for Phil Murphy, and Bergen County being a 6-point win for Phil Murphy. And then you also have the typical Democratic strongholds. You have Hudson, Essex, Union, but Middlesex, a blue area, Jack Ciattarelli cut the margins down 12 points. Somerset was only a 4-point win for Murphy versus Ciattarelli. Mercer was about a 30-point one. And then you see in the middle of the southern New Jersey, really strong performances for Jack Ciattarelli. Monmouth, an 18-point win. Ocean, roughly a 36-point win. Burlington was a strong win, but a small one for Phil Murphy of about 7 points or so. Camden, a very strong win for Murphy. You see red Gloucester, red Salem, red Cumberland, red Cape May, and red Atlantic counties. This is what Jack Ciattarelli was able to do in 2021. Now let's compare it to 2024, where Donald Trump did much better than expected, but ultimately Kamala Harris still won by right around 6 points, which is kind of where the governor election could potentially be heading in this election. Here you saw President Trump do very well, not as well as Jack Ciattarelli in some areas, but also better than Jack Ciattarelli in some areas. Hunterdon was a 6.6% win for Donald Trump, so not nearly as strong as Jack Ciattarelli. But Trump was able to win Morris County by 2.7, but also win Passaic County by 2.9. So though his margins in Morris were worse than Ciattarelli, Trump was able to win Passaic. Trump won or lost Bergen County to Harris by 3.4%, not too far off from what Jack Ciattarelli did in 2021. Then you see Somerset being a 14-point Democratic win, Middlesex an 8-point Democratic win. You're seeing a little bit less red in Gloucester and Atlantic and Cumberland as well for Trump. What you're looking for, if you're Jack Ciattarelli, you're trying to look at your map and pretty much replicate everything, but also try and keep President Trump's growth in the Passaic, New Jersey area, and also trying to make some more inroads into Bergen County as well. If you're Mikie Sherrill, you're looking at what Kamala Harris did in 2024, and you're looking at what Phil Murphy did in 2021, and you're trying to expand on it. At very least, you're trying to match Kamala Harris's numbers, because you're needing Camden, Burlington, and Mercer all need to be more than 15-point wins. For the Sherrill campaign, you would love to see Somerset break 15%. You would love to see Middlesex break 10%. Will it ultimately happen? We'll have to wait and see. Middlesex is possible. Somerset breaking 15 points, probably not going to happen, but you would like to try and expand on these margins as much as possible. Union, Essex, and Hudson should all be safe, but you'd like to see it be even safer for Mikie Sherrill. Now, Bergen County, if it goes red, it's not going to be a total deal breaker. Like, Mikie Sherrill can still win if she doesn't win Bergen County, but it's a suburb. It's a county that should probably be voting Democratic. If it is voting red, that could be a sign Jack Ciattarelli is outperforming. But if Mikie Sherrill is winning this race, this county is probably going blue. So what does this ultimately make for? This is a race that I think is sort of in between the 2021 race where Jack Ciattarelli lost by about 3 points and a race where Kamala Harris beat Donald Trump here by about 5.9%. It's possible it swings a lot closer in the final few hours of this campaign. Let me go to New Jersey here. It's possible that it swings and goes under a 1-point race if turnout is super high for Jack Ciattarelli. That is certainly possible. It's also possible Mikie Sherrill's turnout could be very good and she could win by more than 6 points. She could win by 7 or 8 points. Is certainly possible as well. But I think this race is going to fall somewhere in between the 2021 and 2024 margins, in between that 3-point and 5.9% margin. Now, ultimately, I do have Mikie Sherrill winning this race. I have her winning it in the lean Democratic category, which is in between 1 and 5%. I am on the higher end of that number. I think she wins it by about 4.5 percentage points. Now, this is going to be a very fascinating race to watch for, because not only this governor's race has some very important ramifications for New Jersey in obviously 2025 in the next 4 years as its governor, but also what does this state mean for the 2026 midterms for its very competitive House seats, and what does it mean for 2028? Can the Republicans that have made gains here in 2021, 2024, maybe 2025, can they keep that going into a 2028 presidential campaign, especially if they do have a Republican governor in Jack Ciattarelli? This could be a very important ramification. But if Mikie Sherrill wins this race and wins it by larger margins, could that maybe put a little bit of a slow to the Republicans' momentum in New Jersey and say that, no, this state's not going to become a toss-up yet. This is still the Democratic stronghold state that it once was. So New Jersey is a very fascinating state. This is, in my opinion, the most fascinating matchup that is up in 2025, has been all cycle. The Virginia Attorney General's race is making a very tough competition for most competitive and interesting election, but I think New Jersey is the most fascinating one. I can't wait to see the election results come in, and I know this is going to be a very fascinating race to watch for and to react to after all the votes come in. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to hit like and subscribe. Stay tuned because I have the last prediction to do for the 2025 cycle in Virginia coming out tomorrow. Make sure not to miss that one. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in a future video.